Welcome to another episode of Prototype, the fourth episode, in fact. It is 12:55 in the afternoon of Monday, the 13th of March, 2023, and of course, I am me. I'm here to talk about some stuff related to game design. I actually wanted to talk about assets because graphically, we've actually been slowly but surely upgrading the visual fidelity of Cosmonarchy Brood War, our Gigunda conversion for StarCraft 1. And I would like to, improve some of the stuff that's already out there. Like, I kind of look at the Panoptis maybe could be improved, probably in terms of like the compositing or something. The Matador is maybe a little bit too dark with the shadows. There's all these different little things that we can definitely continue tweaking. But in every case that we have deployed a new graphic, like on the pre-release, you can actually go grab the new Vagrant if you're interested. I haven't done the Shade version yet, but the actual unit is functional with some help from Solstice, John A., who has been really, I guess, he's been the workhorse for most of the changes that have occurred, making a lot of the new models, like the Wraith and the Panoptis, the Vassal. I'm manipulating some of the old meshes, and obviously I'm mucking about with some of the compositing and stuff. So really nice that he has provided his skills in the third dimension for us, as well as, of course, with Blender specifically. And yeah, we were doing all that stuff. We were mucking about with that and trying to improve things. And every single time we have a graphic which replaces something. Oh yeah, he also did the Legionnaire. How could I forget? Every time we have a graphic that replaces something in CMBW, it is an objective improvement, even if maybe there's still some more improvements to make, right? Like he did a work in progress version of the Aurora, and then I adjusted it, and maybe it's still not super good right now, or maybe we need to give it another attempt at a redesign. I was trying to give a nod to Five Nations with the design that lasted, but kind of looking at it right now, maybe it's a little too derpy. I don't know. We'll think about it, right? And so, yeah, there's still plenty of other graphics to make. We think, the Simulacrum, the Manifold, a lot of the graphics that still need to be redesigned in some capacity. I was actually just mentioning to John that we should maybe, if he's interested in remaking existing models from the original game, one of the things that he could obviously do is work on the Goliath, because that is also a perspective render, just like the Scout. And obviously DF has recently done the bunker, as well as an overhaul of the ion cannon to make it so that it is omnidirectional. And that is all very, very epic. Everybody has enjoyed the bunker. It has feet now, in case you somehow missed it. I was talking with Kian last night that we should maybe lean into the more meme-oriented marketing of, like, you could imagine just like a YouTube short style video, I guess, where it's just like, what happens if the bunker has feet or something? I don't know. And I don't know what the title of the short would be, but I know that the when you like the actual video would basically be some like gruff, deep voice saying, "Don't mind if I just put my feet up right here," as a bunker lands in a mineral line and executes a bunch of workers and shit. It's just like stuff like that is I don't know how it's kind of absurdist, but I feel like it would be wacky enough to think like, oh shit, like you can actually do this. And like, especially if we end the short with, play CMBW now at this link or whatever, I don't know. Stuff like that could be kind of interesting, but maybe that's how we reach a new generation of gamer. Or maybe it's just, we make funny and entertaining content, I don't know what the angle is there exactly. And like as we've been getting more graphics in, the project has just felt more complete. Like the Legionnaire is an actual unit now instead of a recolor and rescale of the Zealot, right? And I think even you certainly say that the mesh could be improved in some way, or the lighting or whatever could maybe be improved, the materials. But you can definitely say that it's an improvement over what we had before. And the Vagrant, it would also be something that is true about that, right? Like the same kind of deal. And so, I kind of think about like when we were first replacing some of the graphics for Terran, when we replaced like the Blackjack and the Cyclops and even the Ecclesiast way back. The true OGs may remember how ugly the graphic we had for the Ecclesiast was once upon a time before we were able to, like before Baleathal was able to get a new render out for it. And that is just like, I'm glad we're leaving all of those things in the dust, and that's really nice. So A lot of your designs are also impacted by the visuals. I was also talking with Kian about this, and maybe also Veek recently. And it's just, these are things that I think about, right? I'm thinking like, when I have the new graphic, I mean, part of it is that, oh, isn't it so exciting we have this graphic that's actually useful? So maybe the unit should then be more powerful or something. Like, there's probably some slight bias there. But also it's like, oh, well, this graphic informs what the unit actually is and gives you something different than like what you thought it was. And so like the Legionnaire, the concept that Solstice ended up going with was like a spear or a pike or something. And as a result, it's now a different kind of unit, right? It's slightly larger attack range, excuse me. And, he does the double thrust, and that's how he preserved the 2 times attack. But it's still one of those things where it's like, okay, he's got that move down or whatever, but it's very different. Like, now we've extended his melee range a little bit. It's still melee, obviously, but it's a little bit different. So yeah, anyway, you get to see stuff like that, and I think it's interesting and enjoyable, but it's also fascinating. It's like, oh, well, maybe the unit should be a little bit more durable if it's going to be a little bit bigger, and maybe if it's going to be bigger, it also should have a bigger collision size. All these things like change the calculus a lot and gives you a bit of a different idea of what the unit's identity really is. I suspect that the recently the Goliath received plus 20 HP as a part of a buff. I think that went over quite well, actually. But the other thing that I was thinking is that if we end up re-rendering it and it's not perspective anymore, it'll be a lot more consistently sized, and that means that it'll probably end up being slightly larger. And especially, I mean, with the Panoptis case, when Solstice made that model, he was asking, like, should it actually be bigger ideally? Because now it's like a more bulkier unit in terms of its durability and stuff. And like, yeah, it should be. So seeing stuff like that is, it's just a natural evolution, I suppose. Like, as you put your stamp on each individual unit more viscerally with some sort of visual overhaul, you actually get to think about what else the unit might do or what else the unit might have. A lot of these concepts are super old. The Legionnaire and the Hierophant, as well as the Cyprian and the Shaman, were amongst the original OG units added back when this project was still called Project Hydra. The Vorvercore and the Bactylisk, back when they were called Vorvaling and Basilisk. It sounds so weird to say Vorvaling, but that was really the unit's name for a while. So, yeah. pretty crazy stuff. I always record prototypes after drinking coffee and eating peanut butter. So if you're always wondering why I'm clearing my throat, that's why. That is why I'm doing that all the time. Just a dummy. But yeah, I think it's really interesting anyway to see the visual side of things and seeing that shape up. It does make a really big difference. Of course, the project is only as visually strong as its weakest asset in many respects. And there's also a lot of other areas that we should try to improve things with. For example, the weapon hit effects, a lot of them are reused. The any sort of overlays or visuals and stuff, a lot of those are reused. We recently did the corpse revision that allowed us to get reclamation implemented and parasite implemented, and we're still working on the balancing and the like what those mechanics really are going to turn into. But the idea behind them anyway is that you have more corpse interactions, and as a result, I think you're probably going to see some more effort placed into making corpses more distinct now, because it actually does matter a lot more about what units you're actually observing having died or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of a natural sort of solution there that needs to be taken. But yeah, there's also a lot of graphics, like for actual unit meshes. I was talking about the Goliath as a specific example. And people have talked about the scribe even. Mesk was pointing out that the scribe doesn't match the rest of the Protoss. Even the render style, like it's not anti-alias to the same degree. It doesn't have like the same sort of materials, of course. Like Blizzard was not very consistent at all with any of their renders in that sense. So yeah, I think a big part of that obviously is going to contribute. But then you look at stuff like the Amaranth, for example, is very clearly this, like, or the Herald might even be a better example, but the Amaranth in particular is like, it would be nice if we could bring him in line with stuff like the Legionnaire and the Ecclesiast and now the Vagrant, where we actually have this idea of what Protoss infantry is going to look like. And maybe I can take the Legionnaire and do some more work with him as far as, kit bashes go. Like I was basically able to take the Ecclesiast and modify it into the Vagrant. So it stands to reason I could do the same thing with the Legionnaire into the Amaranth or something of that nature. I guess also, we don't want to deviate too heavily from the what consistent art style you can glean from Brood War. Obviously, one of the main ideas that Solstice had when he joined the project, sort of informally. He's not necessarily on the like he's not necessarily a not fraud. He's not like working with our own games. I should mention, although the opportunity could certainly arise if he's interested and has the time to spare. But it's been interesting talking with him and seeing that he's just like, yeah, I'll just work on fucking all this stuff because I like the project. I guess I guess I haven't really asked him directly why he's what has motivated it, but a lot of it is implicit. It's like, you guys are doing this really impressive stuff, but here's an area where you're clearly your project is deficient and I can assist, right? And so that's definitely quite impressive. Just like sometimes we're deficient in money, and so people give us threes on coffee. Like that's what they can do. Luciferius was talking about doing some casting. Obviously, he's a very busy guy, so he hasn't gotten around to it yet. But making content for the game and stuff is obviously another thing. Kian was actually saying when he gets his computer upgraded, he looks forward to being able to do some content in that as well. And it's just, if we can get more stuff like that, where more community involvement, it doesn't have to all be money. It can certainly be like Ben Taberski, obviously making a lot of maps. You can actually play Desert Duality, and I actually added a bunch of the other ones that he made to the non-standard folder. But I think Desert Duality is actually a fairly solid map from what I've seen from the castovers and the replays and stuff. So maybe my opinion would be different when I actually played it, but I feel like it's good enough to throw in there, considering the what else we have in the map pool, so to speak, and stuff like that is neat. It's just, you get into a territory where people are actually working on stuff within your project. It goes kind of from that's the beauty of like crowdsourcing it, I guess, and having an involved community that is kind of made up by a bunch of hobbyists, right? And that's where we all started. We all started as hobbyist modders, trying to make something that was actually good. And maybe we've succeeded, maybe we failed. With CMBW, I think we've succeeded with some asterisks, usually related to like desyncs and crashes and shit. But, when it works, it works pretty well. And yeah, there's some abuse cases like the ion cannon or whatever, but you can get over that and you can improve that and whatnot. And actually, it's not something that should really make you feel better about the thing that your project has or whatever. Like, you shouldn't necessarily compare to other games. But when Mesk was talking about in the most recent episode of the Big Boys Table, how a lot of games have way worse imbalances than something like an ion cannon or whatever, it does end up being like, at the very least, that part of it is not unique to this project. It's just, how can we make it better? And maybe we just have higher standards, and that's why it shines out a little bit. I also spoke about this in the latest episode of the Crow's Nest, or just Crow's Nest. Of course, there's no the there. The is for the No Frauds Club. And what I spoke about in that episode was, I feel a general sense of, I guess it's like, I don't really want to have my standards lowered in any capacity. And when you have this idea that you're going to make this really big epic game like what Cosmonic Retail is supposed to be, set in Zabalba as a universe, it doesn't end up feeling very good when you're like, okay, let's actually downscale. Let's like work on a smaller game. That feels like a bad omen or something. Like you're going backwards almost. So yeah, in general, when I think about what we're going to be working on or what we are working on in Antikythera now, I view it as, yes, it's not very ambitious compared to what I want, but I had to reframe what ambitious meant, because compared to the rest of the RTS genre, it still was ambitious. And so I can tie that all back into Cosmonic Brood War just by commenting on the fact that it does, or it is ambitious. It does achieve certain things. It sets out to do things that nobody else has really set out to do within the RTS, like within the games industry, within the RTS genre. And it's just a mod. It's just a little like dinky project. Even though I say good things about it, and I do believe in it, and I am appreciative of it, and I play it a lot. I actually wrote an article on Substack just earlier today talking about this exact thing, where you play your own project and you get somewhere with that. I was thinking about that, and yes, all that's true, but also it's a mod, and it's not our own IP, and there's only so many things we can do with it, and it's closed source, and it's unstable, and it's buggy, and it has all of these graphical issues, although that obviously has been being attenuated. So I think of it as a very flawed gem, I guess, if you want to call it that. For whatever good things it does, it has a decent number of drawbacks, which we would like to remove, right? Or just avoid, I guess, in our future work. And that's why we're making our own engine, for example, and that's why we're going our own path down the evolution of the RTS genre. So yeah, all of that to say, it's really good to experiment. It's really good to try some stuff out, and I think the player versus player content or games in general have definitely helped that. You know, Vic talked about the project blooming as a result of the player versus player interactions with replay support and all this other stuff. And yeah, a lot of that stuff is buggy and has some asterisks, but it's pretty awesome that we get to experiment in the first place. And so, yes, I will still refer to Cosmonic Brood War as both, you know, perhaps the greatest RTS experience that you can have currently and also a dinky fucking mod, because it is both of those things. Or to whatever degree to whatever degree it's a high quality RTS experience, it's also a, you know, dinky mod experience where shit just doesn't work as well as I would like it to. And that's why, you know, I would really prefer if people were thinking about any sort of financial contributions, if they were thinking about it in terms of investment into what we're making in the future, based on the track record, like based on the good stuff that you can see in Cosmonic Brood War, when it does work, when it doesn't have really critical issues, the promise of that being made in our own engine, to some degree, it makes me uncomfortable to accept funding because we haven't actually shipped a game yet. But the reality of the world is that we actually can't necessarily ship a game. I mean, we could. It would just take a lot longer if we had to ship a game without any community funding. And I wasn't even sure we were going to get much money, but as it turns out, there's some Chads out there that happen to be rolling in the dough. So shout out to them, I guess. Of course, I did end up setting up a private channel on the Discord server specifically for people who are donating to us through Coffee or have donated to us through Coffee. So if you're interested in that, I guess you can also do that. I try to avoid publicating too much the like perks or whatever. Obviously we talk about like making you a map and stuff for your birthday. That's shit that we would do anyway if you were a member of the community and giving back. And odds are you are one of those if you're going to be giving us money to begin with. So there is that. But yeah, I don't want to make it seem like, again, it's like some sort of weird like quid pro quo thing, like, oh, you should do this for this perk. It's more like I guess I try to explain it this way. A lot of people who open up Patreon accounts or whatever fall into this trap where they feel like they are like your payment to them should give you some perk, and that exchange has to be, you know, even or whatever. But the whole idea of making the content, making the games, is that we're providing value to you by default. And so I don't want to make it feel like there's this weird, almost maybe not predatory, but like this weird uncomfortable relationship where you guys are going to give me money and Veek money, and as a result, we are going to have to do more things. Like, the things that we have put up as perks are just things that we would do anyway, engaging with the community in a channel on the Discord server and making maps and to, you know, commemorate and celebrate members of the community and stuff. I talked a little bit about the map stuff in the latest Crow's Nest as well. That kind of stuff is infinitely more healthy because it's just an extension of what we were already doing, and it doesn't really take us that much work in terms of like attention away from what we're already doing. Not to say that we wouldn't put effort into the content or the responses or whatever. It's not performative. It's just that is a low barrier of like a low time cost. So in theory, it wouldn't actually be a crazy thing to deal with, right? Now, again, these are not like super epic perks you really want to spend money on. We're not like offering services or products that are worth the money necessarily. It's more like that's not what we're doing through the Coffee page. It's more like, here's what we're doing, and we're building this project, and you can see that people have invested their time into it. And if you happen to also want to invest money into it or whatever, then like that's something you can do. Again, though, I would really stray away from thinking about CMBW in that way, just because I really am uncomfortable taking money for a mod. I really am uncomfortable for taking money from something that's not even out yet. But at the very least, we are enriching your lives already to some degree, and you can put some $ value on that if you are comfortable, and that's sort of how I try to think about it. And hopefully, that's how the people who are currently backing us think about it too. Because otherwise, it just gets icky. Like, there is something undeniably icky about saying, hey, I haven't made a game yet, but you want to give me some money? I was thinking about the early access phenomenon, and I've been working on a little thing in Unreal, And well, it's not so little actually. Like everything else I do, it's very ambitious, but it's not something I'm spending a crazy amount of time on. It's just like maybe once or twice a week I'll boot up Unreal Engine and fuck around with stuff. And I was actually able to get Mesk to record a walkthrough of some recommended graphical settings and stuff that I think will probably be useful. I'll take a look at that at some point when I have a bit more time later on this week. And that stuff is like, it's kind of like an attempt to make a game in the style of maybe a Divinity or, one of those games where it's a turn-based strategy in a fantasy-oriented setting with really crazy stuff going on. But it's actually good. Like the thing that comes at the end of all of these sentences is, but it's actually good, because Divinity has a lot of problems. It really, really I've never sat through any of the conversations. I find them all really intolerable and annoying. But that's the convention of the genre almost, and so I don't even know how I would adjust that necessarily. But I imagine it would be a very different experience playing through a world that I made as opposed to one of these other ones. At the very least, what you can say for Divinity is that, like, as much as they do a lot of copy and pasting, it is their own world. It's not like those developers are now making a Baldur's Gate game, and so it's not like they're making with Divinity a franchise that they didn't make. I mean, I say that, but also Divinity was a really old franchise, like Divine Divinity and stuff, and I don't know if they're related and if they're the same people at all. So maybe actually that's not true, and maybe they're, I don't know. I don't know much about the background of that company. What it seems like is that the first two Divinity games were made with the idea that they aren't going to just purely copy-paste Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And you can mostly feel that in the mechanics, actually, although obviously there's still a lot of RNG. So anyway, you can imagine I'm working on this game. It's going to be like, what if you had a turn-based strategy game that didn't have RNG in it, basically, and what if also the world was living and breathing, and so you found yourself starting in this area that was on, part of a Kingdom X, and then Kingdom Y was, fighting a war against them, and so maybe there's an invasion, and it has nothing to do with what you were doing, and you can choose to take sides or fuck off. And that's the kind of thing that I think is interesting as a concept anyway, is like, what if the world just does stuff and things happen around you? And that would almost be this like meta narrative thing where like real life, things just happen around you to some degree, and there's things you can control and things you can't. That's sort of what the Stoic perspective details and teaches. And, focusing on the things that you can control is usually better, right? And also finding your own way in the world. I guess many people would probably find an experience like that potentially aimless, but and there would certainly be more grounding. Just like my certain general philosophy for like the idea of realism in games is that you don't really want realism, you want hyper-realism. Although that term also has some like Soviet background, I think. So I don't even know if I should be using that word anymore. I haven't done the research yet. But hyper-realism to me means this idea that, sort of like what Jonathan Lowe was talking about in the third episode of our Clubhouse conversation, where his third appearance on that show anyway, where he spent some time talking about and discussing the idea that like mundane things are not really what you find in stories. You find like really important things that are distilled to like the best parts of them. And that's what makes a good story, is like when it's not boring and trotting and plotting and all this other shit, right? So what if you had a game where that was actually the case? Like the moments did have merit and weight and all this other stuff. And there was a sliding scale so that some moments felt more epic than others, obviously. But still, there was an element of finding your own way in this very large world that you didn't fully understand. That's very much something that connects to real life as well. And I find that potentially interesting to explore anyway in the medium of a turn-based game. And it would also mean that obviously you have to make a world that's actually living and breathing. And it would just show that everybody else has been doing it wrong anyway. And that's usually what my work does, I feel like, is, here's some content, and in that content you see like a counter example to everything that you've seen before, and it ends up being pretty good. So like, who would have thought removing supply was a good move, for example, or whatever, So anyway, not to pat myself on the back too much, just saying that's usually the approach I try to take, is like, I am motivated. I think it's a necessary aspect, because you have to be motivated by something, right? And I'm internally motivated to make something good. But a big part of that started off with me being really dissatisfied with what else is around. And that dissatisfaction has not gone away. It's not like games have gotten better, right? As by and large. So as a result of that, I feel like, yeah, you have to have some sort of extrinsic motivation, or you don't have to, I guess. You can be some sort of like proto-human or superhuman, I guess. But the idea is most of the time there's going to be some extrinsic motivation, and that external motivation comes from, in my case, a dissatisfaction of how everybody else has done things. And I feel like so far I'm being proven right, at least with CMBW and with the plans for the other games and stuff. A lot of it is super speculative, I guess, but we're getting there, and that's the important part. So anyway, the reason I was bringing up the Unreal project at all is because I was talking with Kian last night about early access and how, like, for example, I think Barotrauma has been in early access for 7 years and it's still not technically finished, although it might be soon. Something crazy like that. And that's crazy to us, but it might not even be that uncommon in early access. I don't know what the average time it is. Like, maybe some games never exit it, right? And so that they would obviously be infinite. But the other thing is that if I was going to make a game and use early access for it, the game would obviously not be premium. It would not be paid until it was released, right? And I don't know how I would handle, like, early access people. Like, I guess they would just have the game if they played it. And it would probably be one of those cases where I literally just say, like, yeah, if you downloaded the game and installed it, then you have it. And now it's premium. So, like, thanks for contributing towards the game's development or whatever, right? Something like that, basically, because that's sort of what I would think about it is. I shouldn't be asking people to pay to test a product. Like, that doesn't make any fucking sense, right? So, I guess it would be early access, and maybe I would just link them to the fucking coffee page if they wanted to give us money. But for the most part, that's what it would be. And so that's something that I was thinking about. These are all like potential vectors I can explore, especially if the Indie Fund pitch doesn't go as planned or whatever. But I mean, I'm pretty sure it will, but I was also kind of sure about it the last time. So you never really know. And even if it does go that way, where we do get the Indie Fund thing, this might be a way to develop a game a little bit more on the slow side, like hobby style. And then over the course of maybe a couple of years or whatever, it would shape into something really nice. And that's just some of the thoughts that I have. But that's the kind of thing that I would think early access is about, is like, play for free, check it out. And if you actually think there's something here and you do want to support development financially, then you can do so. But otherwise, like, that certainly should not be the expectation before you even start playing the game. And a lot of games are premium despite being unfinished. I mean, most games that are not early access are also unfinished. But just in terms of, like, saying the early access label, like, putting that on there is saying the game is not finished. Like, it's admitting to it without you having to even start the game to find out. So the idea that I'm also expected to pay money just doesn't seem sit right with me as on either side of the fence. Again, I find it really uncomfortable to normalize the idea that you should pay for something without it actually being there, which is why I try to break down the idea of crowdfunding and support as investment into a product that it, like, or payment for services rendered, even like all the videos I produce and the stuff you're listening to right now, and the community that I've helped to build, and all this other stuff has enriched your life in some way. And so, okay, there you go. That's another way you can think about it, and I think that's just healthier. I think that's just better. So that is the initial set of subjects, I suppose. We covered graphics in CMBW being changed and improved over time. That will obviously continue. I was just yesterday doing a stream where I was working on the Vagrant, and it's now in the game on pre-release. So you can check that out. What else was there? Milestone came back in the stream yesterday, actually, and a shout out to Milestone. It's been a while since I've seen him. And it when people sort of show up again after a little bit of time, it actually reminds you of, like, it forces you to cast your mind back to what state you were in and your work was in when they last participated. And that is actually really neat, because it reminded me of all the things, all the progress that we had made, all the things we had done. It was actually really cool. Like, the last time Milestone was here, we didn't have the skipping the single, like, the mode selection in the menu, and we didn't have the launcher at all. We didn't have the automatic updates, basically, or not automatic, I guess, but like the easier updates and stuff. Like, we didn't have the simplified process. I didn't even have a green screen for Mahuha to appear. And, like, what the hell, man? How did I get by? So yeah, all that being said, it does seem like it's a pretty good deal. And I'm a big fan of the idea that, yeah, we're going to continue improving things. And every now and then you get to experience that whiplash of, like, oh, remember when we had this? Like, I remember when we had upgrades still, and I remember when we had supply still, and it was just crazy. Just crazy. So yeah, things are going to continue improving, and the graphics are just one subset of that. And then, of course, we covered the whole pricing thing, and the coffee thing, and all this other stuff. And at the very least, what I can do for you guys is make the calls to action, I think they call them, is all these cringe marketing terms. I can make all of the experiences of you hearing about coffees and threes. I can at least make them funny and in-jokey, so you still get something out of them, even if you're not interested or able to. So that makes a lot of sense to me anyway. Shout out to Roller Skates as well, who said he was, if he wanted, like, what he was going to do was send me his audio files, ask for payment for them, and then give me the payment back as donations. That's funny. That is funny. There's some, we got some jokers in the stream. We got some jokers in the community. Good comedians. I guess the term for the $69 a month is the laughing stock, I think. Kian told me to add a 333 a month tier, which, I mean, it's funny, but then somebody might actually do it, and I don't know how I would feel about that part, so maybe I'll do it anyway. I don't know. I did add a 42 a month tier from My Name is Lol's suggestion, so maybe it should be My Name is Money. I think it's My Name is N right now or something. Doesn't even make sense. It's not even a good joke. Anyway, the stuff to do to wrap this up. This might just be the first part of a prototype, by the way. I think recording these in two parts is sometimes more useful than doing it all at once. And today I want to do some more work, but I don't have limited time because I have to work. So that makes sense. If you know, you know. Thanks to the generous people on the coffee page, I don't have to work as much, which is nice. Shout out to those guys. Yeah, so the main difference maker, I guess, here is I think probably the biggest thing that we have to do for CMBW now is tidy up reclamation and corpses, and then try to, I had this idea for Empresses as a rework where they would continue the zombies. The zombies would probably move and attack half as fast, or maybe just move half as fast, right? Which kind of makes sense for them to be zombies or called zombies. But the Empress would preserve their life as long as the Empress was in the area, or a Empress was in the area, an Empress. I think that's a pretty legitimate move, in my opinion, to make the ability more interactive, because it might be the last permanent debuff still left in the game. At the very least, it's the last one I'm immediately aware of. So we definitely want to fix that stuff up and make that more interactive. So that's one thing that we can do. We can explore, again, this idea that Mesk mentioned in his CMBW ramble was this idea that if you're going to have mind control or possession or whatever, you should try to make it so that it's transformative and alters the original identity of the unit. And if we can push all of that stuff in that direction, then that will be a good spot, right? Reclamation, doing its reclamation stuff and then making it so that the unit doesn't leave behind a corpse. That is an alteration, but I don't know if it's super useful or what. I don't necessarily want to do the aura thing the same way that the Empress keeps the zombies alive. I don't think it makes sense to do that for reclamation. But at the same time, I don't know how exactly I would balance out the idea, because with reclamation you can very easily build mind control or whatever, reclaim a worker and then build another more tech and stuff. And that's kind of I don't want to do some gimmick where workers don't get reclaimed. Obviously they should leave corpses visually, and I would really hate for the system to just not work for them. But I don't really know what the solution would be to that, because I don't really want you, one of the things we were talking about, Vic and I, is that a Kister infestation should, the way that the structures regress into the original owner, the same thing should be happen to any units that are trained by them. And so there's this actual alteration where, technically you could be training more units or something. It also means if you infest an ally, it becomes more interesting, I guess. It actually technically becomes a buff, although you'd have to have pretty good awareness and control. So I don't know if that's legit or not. But, it's just one of the things, right? So that's kind of interesting. And I think that would be a good change, so that it's kind of like an alteration of some kind. Because if you're infesting structures, you're expressly infesting infrastructure so you can train stuff. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That being said, there's a couple of other things that are, still in the game, Demiurge and Mind Tyrant control is just permanent. It's conditionally permanent, I guess, for the Mind Tyrant, and we were thinking about the Demiurge maybe doing the same thing. being like a mechanical robotic version of the Mind Tyrant tyranny. So it would also apply tyranny instead of worship or whatever we call the current one. Well, it is worship. So yeah, stuff like that is, I don't know. I'm not sure what other things we can do to alter stuff. I'm sure we can just explore that conceptually and then come up with good ideas that sanely limit the experience of like just having the other race's tech, but also like to whatever degree you have the other race's tech, you are altering it to fit your tech. You know what I mean? And that's sort of what the Zerg do, but that's not really what the other races do. So figuring stuff like that out, like that's the zombie alteration of like reducing their movement speed or whatever is biases it towards like a sustained skirmish. Because if you have to reposition with them, then it's maybe it's just a bit of a chore or whatever. I don't know. Stuff like that is kind of interesting anyway. So I guess aside from that, there's a couple of other things that we can talk about. Of course, the big one being the ion cannon revision. I sent over a description of the targeting sphere that I want for like a projectile basically to DF. And so we'll see if he can model it and get some version of it working anyway for the next Fraudarchy, because then we can make the ion cannon revisions somewhat easily. Actually, I thought it was going to be technically challenging, but I'm pretty sure we can do it pretty easily, actually. Once we have all of the visuals in, it'll actually look proper. Otherwise, I guess like as a temporary read, we might be able to just have like some sort of low detail sphere or something that indicates it with some simple animation. But yeah, and then DF can do like an updated version of that later on. Like maybe I can make something really quick as a placeholder or whatever. So yeah, you can expect that soon. You can definitely expect more visuals for the various races soon. We haven't started working too much on Zerg yet. I rigged something that I plan to use for the Sikrilisk. And like I animated and rigged it, but I rigged it and modeled it, I guess, or edited it because it's from some Sketchfab download, I think. But the primary thing that still needs to be done is definitely animations, and then we need to configure materials. Of course, we need to like try to like maybe John and I can work together on that and stuff. So you can expect maybe some first time Zerg renders as well, which is trepidatious territory since the organic stuff is super abstract a lot of the time. And yeah, I guess in other words, in other news, you can expect more stuff like the engram and the Xenolith for Protoss, advanced defenses like the Tensender being implemented eventually when DF rolls out the modified heavy bunker type unit, which is basically what that is. Stuff like that, you know. So we'll see how that works out. But yeah, that's this part of Prototype or the end of Prototype. You can tell yourself based on what I decide to do and based on the length of the video. So thanks for listening so far, I suppose. And thanks for your support. Thanks for being part of the community. Big smoochies on that front, man. And if you're not part of the Discord server already, you should be. So check it out.